Peace be with you. Great to have you here, and this is Pentecost Sunday, which means that we celebrate that time of waiting to be the witnesses that I talked about last week. That finishes for the disciples. And the story goes that they were in the house and they were praying and they were gathered together and they were talking about Jesus and being God's people in that space. And then what sounded like a wind came over the house. And then there were tongues of fire. The Spirit came down like tongues of fire and touched all of their heads. And the disciples, they were in that place, and then they spilled out into the streets where there were crowds. And the disciples started to tell about Jesus. And one of the things we remember on Pentecost is that the disciples started to speak in languages so that the people who were there could hear about Jesus in the language they were most familiar with. So if they had grown up with the language, that's what they were hearing. And they were hearing the story of Jesus and of God's love and God's grace. And everyone was amazed. And there's a lot else that happened that day, but that's primarily what we remember. And we also remember the wonderful thing that happens as the disciples move out and tell about Jesus. They form the church. We remember that on that day, the fire comes, the Holy Spirit comes, fills the disciples up, and they spill out into the streets to become something quite different, something quite beautiful, which we remember as the church. And if I can get this to work for me today. This is going to take a second, I think. I'm not as good as the disciples getting things started. What came as the fire the disciples had. And then you know what happens? They spill out into the streets and they become something much different. They become something beautiful that spreads out into the world and that all the world can see. So, I've got my fire that changed into my red rose to remind us of being the church and of celebrating all that God gives us as we live and serve together as God's people. Now, I wanted to thank everyone who sent in their pictures for the Pentecost Challenge. And as this video, after we do the Lord's Prayer, I'm going to have those and some music. Wonderful, wonderful, creative things. And I'm so pleased to see those coming back. There are, as always, some crafts and some activities to do just below where this video is. And of course, we'll continue on next week learning more about Jesus and the church and how to be God's people in the world. And before we get to those beautiful pictures, why don't we just pause and pray as Jesus taught? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. I hope you have a great week, and I hope to see you here next week.